Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Dave Billington, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also director of the Dream Research Institute. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist Laura Payne.
Hello, I'm Laura Payne, and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute. And we're called the Dreamboat because we are actually recording our podcast on a beautiful canal barge here at Little Venice in London called the Boat Pod.
We'll be looking at dreams, talking to guest experts, and answering your questions.
Now, let's get on with the episode. So, why do we dream and what do our dreams mean have been questions that have engaged us probably since we realised we can access this weird alternative reality called dreaming when asleep.
Yeah, we're going to look at this major aspect of dream research over several podcast episodes as it's so fundamental to who we are. Today, we're looking at the impact of dream sharing, which sits at the heart of many cultures over the centuries, and how it has shaped who we are as human beings.
Yes, there's some fascinating research in this field, and we're excited to be joined today by an amazing collaboration partnership that is exploring what happens when science and art collide in the realms of dream sharing.
And so today we are joined by Professor of Psychology Mark Blagrove. Mark is Director of the Sleep Lab at Swansea University in the UK and has been investigating dreams for more than 30 years.
And we're also joined by a fellow academic, Associate Professor at Swansea College of Art, Julia Lockheart, whose collaborations called DreamsID with Mark into depicting dream narratives have taken them around the world, exploring the links between science and art. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think, Dave, over to you, really, because they're here also because they've written this book.
Yeah. So you've written this very impressive book, The Science and Art of Dreaming, which is now available from Routledge. And it's so comprehensive that when Laura and I were first talking about this, we joked we could have you on for several episodes,
yes.
and we may. But you start from what dreams are and what affects their content. So can you tell us about how one goes about designing an experiment to test what affects the content of dreams?
Yes, there's been very many experiments on that over the years, and they have done, for example, in some experimental methods, something is played to people or shown to people, such as a film, or people who've had some experience are sought out, such as an earthquake or such as 9/11, and then their dreams are collected, and their dreams are then coded and scored for things such as, is there a threat in the dream, that type of thing. So that's one method of doing it, that either the experimenters can give a stimulus to people, or they can ask people, what does your dream refer to, and try to find out what was in the past that went into the dream. Or alternatively, what can happen is people can keep a diary for, say, 10 days before they're asked to do dream recall in the sleep lab. Mm-hmm. And we've used that method at Swansea a lot, and you can sometimes wake people up from different sleep stages, so you get your REM dreams, your non-REM dreams, and then you watch for or ask them to note correspondences between that and what's been in their diaries over the previous 10 days.
Can you just say a little bit about the difference between REM and non-REM dreams then?
We go through REM and non-REM sleep cyclically during the night, and the REM periods get longer across the night until the last one may be up to half an hour or 40 minutes. The brain is very, very active then. The REM dreams, the main difference is that the REM dreams are longer.
Okay.
And that's pretty much the only difference between them. But it does make the REM dreams appear more interesting and more emotional and more vivid and have more characters, more scenes. But it does seem to be just a function of the fact that the REM dreams are longer.
Okay.
And Julia, just tell us a little bit more about how the collaboration came about with this famous sleep lab.
Well, Mark was asked to do a public engagement event And we were chatting about it, and he said to me that he was doing this, and I said, why don't I draw in almost a notation form at the same time? And he'd never seen that kind of thing before, and it's quite a standard thing to sort of draw as people are in meetings, etc., etc. But then I had the idea, again, through other artists who work with books, to draw into Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. So the first event we did was in this thing called Creatures of the Night, which was British Science Week. And we sat in a sort of pyramidal space, which was full of tropical plants. And as the night came along, so did a lot of bizarre creatures crawling about. But I drew and tore pages out of Freud's book and gave them away to people. There were sort of 20 minutes drawings as the dreams were told. We didn't at that time use the Ullman technique or any particular technique. Mark was mainly doing public engagement, sort of talking to people about dreaming. They were telling us dreams. And then after that event, we realised, there's something to this. There was something very special about using Freud's book as a starting point to pull out words to then include them into imagery about a dream. So it was almost this, we began to observe this sort of return to the image, something that's come, an artwork made at night as you sleep, an individual piece that then the next morning is told, or it maybe bothers you, so you tell it, and then we discuss it and return it to a visual form.
We should say, of course, that Freud's interpretation of dreams is probably one of the seminal sort of 20th century works of art on dreaming. And how amazing that here you are actually painting someone's dream on the pages of this book. It must feel very special for those who you're working with to be handed something. And obviously we're going to put pictures up on our own site and direct people to where they can actually go and see what this looks like. But it is quite remarkable because it doesn't just become a piece of art, does it? It becomes poetry as well.
Absolutely. There's so much that there's a rich texture that comes out of working onto these pages, and yes, it's each time it's completely different. Even though we're using we use the Ullman technique. We have a very, very procedural technique, but each time something incredibly different comes out, and each time the dreamer gains insights from the process. It's very surprising to both Mark and I each time. And Ullman is a genius really in how he's created the structure that we use. We've slightly modified it, but it is his structure. The only way that we've modified it is because I hear the dream for the first time. There's no preparatory work. I hear it for the first time, so I need it to be repeated about 3 times. So he wouldn't normally do that because I'm trying to get the images from the dream. It takes me a while to just fix my mind on something. In the dream, a structure or a pattern. So I listen, we repeat it 3 times at the beginning. And there's a richness that comes from that slowing the dream down. You repeat it again, you repeat it again. So there's something quite rich for the dreamer as well in the repetition and the way that everybody focuses in on that first telling of the dream.
Now, Mark, you were using the Ullman technique previously in your research. And I'm wondering, for people who aren't familiar with it, if you can talk about what the Ullman technique is and how you settled on that as a method.
Yes, I found out about the Ullman technique through going to the conferences of the International Association for the Study of Dreams, and lots of people there either used the technique or they used variations of it, although Montague Ullman wasn't very pleased that people would use variations because he was a psychoanalyst and he had devised this method as one that lay people could use. And so he was very strict about the stages of the method, and the point of the stages is that as much information about the dream is collected first, and then the group becomes more intrigued by the dream by thinking about it in their own terms, what it would be like if I had had this dream. And then the dreamer talks about their own life and what had been occurring just before the dream, in the day or days before it. And the whole point of the method is to collate those different pieces of information separately, and then in the final stage to map the recent waking life of the person to the dream and to find any metaphorical references there. So the main interest for me in the method was that, as I'm not trained as a psychotherapist or counsellor, it's a lay method that all you need to do is to read Montgomery's book to know how to use the method, and then you are, in a way, qualified. And it simply is those mappings of the dream onto previous waking life. It's not anything with any greater theory than that. And so that's the main reason for us using the technique, and it was why I was so interested in it in the first place, and also why I was so interested in it for research purposes, because for research purposes, something that's that simple can be used in experiments, because it doesn't require a large amount of input from a therapist to intuit things. It's much more simple in a way. And so for that reason, it was used by me in psychology experiments. And, for example, do you get more insight from discussing a dream you've had than from discussing a recent waking life episode you've had, or discussing a daydream that's just been collected from you in the sleep lab? And so it's very useful from a pure science point of view to have a method such as that. But it then does allow connections to be made with the person's waking life, and through that, insights were being obtained, which was where all this started off with, wanting to do that as public engagement events. And that was where it came in with Julia then saying that as well as the discussion, there'll be a painting of the dream as well.
I understand that it was this initial collaboration of sort of retelling the dream that enabled you to think more about the advancement of a deeper theory that has emerged through this, that dream-telling, ancient old practice of dream-telling, might actually be something more embedded in human nature in terms of empathy and human development. Julia, I was just thinking, I understand there was a particular dream that you were both working with that brought this to the fore for you.
Yes, the dream of the red door was from very early on when we started. And this dream was when we would do several dreams across a 3-hour period, which we were doing research as we started doing these 20-minute drawings, and then it went to a half an hour, and it was very difficult for me to bring all this information together, and gradually they got longer. But at one point we were doing 3 in a row, and this was the last dream in a row, and the person had waited because everything is done, first come, first serve. We never know what the dreams are going to be, but she wouldn't tell the dream. So it was very interesting for us to sit there and wait. And there was a little bit of frustration in both Mark and I. We weren't communicating that, obviously, and we were waiting. And eventually the dream unrolled. And as it was told, we both became absolutely captivated by this dream and by the telling of the dream, and by there was a little sentence which was, "Where is my home?" And the two of us were almost in tears at this point. And I can still feel my reaction to it now. And it was about a woman whose daughter was moving in with her boyfriend, and she was unsure what to do next in her own life, being left. And that was the dream that that got us thinking about empathy and about how that empathy happened for both Mark and I. And then as we went on, we began to see that empathy in our audiences as well. And the theory about, rather than a dream being about something, or the dream being having a function, we began to think, could the function be the telling of the dream, and therefore the level of community that was developed by sharing something quite something that told a lot about you and about your concerns and about what was bothering you to a community, who would then maybe say, unpick that and say useful comments to you, and almost like a detective novel. Could it be to do with this? Or, yes, you were doing that. Could it be to do with that? So we began to develop this theory about the telling of a dream being maybe what its purpose was in developing culture.
I mean, it's certainly something that's never really been properly researched or considered, has it, Mark?
No, that's right. I mean, there is work within anthropology where the presence of dreams within a community will bond people together. That had certainly been spoken about, but from a psychological point of view, to address whether or not somebody has an increased empathy towards the person telling their dream, that had never been investigated before. There'd been some work on people in intimate relationships and romantic relationships becoming closer as a result of the number of dreams they tell each other, that sort of thing. But work on actual individual dreams, whether or not that would, in telling it, increase your level of empathy that's measured before the telling to after the telling, your increased empathy towards the dream sharer, hadn't been investigated before.
Can you say a little bit about how you measure empathy in those experiments?
Yes, in these experiments, it's something called state empathy. And as in psychology, state measures are ones which can change across time, as opposed to trait measures, which are more permanent. And there is actually a trait empathy, which measures people's average empathy in general, in lots of different circumstances. But state empathy is something different, and it refers to particular instances and possibly to particular people it could refer to as well. And so we got people to complete this questionnaire about their level at which, for example, they understand the emotions of the other person, or they understand the life circumstances of the other person. And after answering lots of those questions, it gives you an empathy score. And we were actually quite surprised that the scores weren't sky high, even amongst very close friends, or people in relationships with each other. And so it was actually interesting that the scores weren't enormous or weren't at the top of the scale, and that as a result of the dream telling, the scores went up, but only for the person who was listening to the dream and discussing the dream with the dream sharer. The dream sharer's level of empathy towards the other people did not change. Or there was no change there, because obviously the dream sharing instance, there's only one dream being shared, and so the dream sharer is concentrating on their own life and is not getting any, for example, self-disclosure, or very much self-disclosure from the other person. And so we would have to have an alternation of dreams being shared by one person and then by the other person back for there to be hypothesized an increase in empathy from each of them towards the other one. But what we did find was a significant increase in empathy from the people who were discussing the dream towards the dream sharer, and a greater knowledge of their life and circumstances as a result of the disclosure. I mean, one thing to note from a science point of view is there will be people who will say, well, look, if you told me your favourite film and discussed that, I would have increased empathy or knowledge of your life. And that is true.
That's what it was, maybe.
Yes. and that is true. And, but the point here is that people do want to share their dreams, and the other point and so these instances will occur. And the other point is, we are finding therefore that dream sharing can cause an increase in empathy. It's not as if the dream, as some people have proposed, is like a delirium and it's meaningless. It is actually the sharing of something that's quite meaningful to the person. And in fact, the dream has arisen during the night as a result of a sifting through of people's emotions and concerns and events from the previous day. So it's a retelling of a film that they've made, which is already referring to their waking life and telling it to other people and then explaining it in terms of their waking life. And that causes the self-disclosure and the empathy increase.
I find it fascinating because obviously as a psychotherapist working with dreams, you can see somebody actually not just sort of spiritually and emotionally change in front of you, but sometimes physically change in front of you once the telling of the dream has been made. We work obviously with Dr. Nigel Hamilton, who explores a lot of this with the waking dream technique, where you can, by sharing the dream, work with the body to find out where parts of that dream, for instance, might be located to release repressed emotions or whatever. It is a fascinating area. But again, this notion of what it's like to receive someone's dream and hold it for them almost feels like a sort of psychotherapist in action in some way.
I think also when you wake up, you often have somatic feelings, strong feelings, and it's those that bring back the recollection of the dream. So you feel disgust or something, and then you think, why have I woken up feeling like this? And then you kind of go back into, oh, it's due to this. So we always work with memorable dreams, and often they're dreams that people don't understand. So, those tend to be the ones that we have shared with us.
So, Mark, I'm interested also in the sort of anthropological context of empathy and why this has been important as part of our development as a species, as a sort of developing our sort of sense of society and social bonding. This notion of empathy being at the heart of humankind, for that matter. You see this sitting within that.
Yes, within anthropology that deals with primates, for example, there is a distinction made between chimpanzees and bonobos, that the chimpanzees will be aggressive towards each other, and especially towards ones that come into the group, whereas bonobos are extremely friendly and sexually friendly with other bonobos that arrive at the group. And so there has been work on why do these different species differ, and on the fact that they may have followed different evolutionary strategies, and what may work for the chimpanzees wouldn't work for the bonobos. And so what's been proposed for humans is that across time we have become, although there are still wars obviously and crime and things like that, but we have become more pro-social, and that's occurred due to a selection in evolutionary terms for people who are less emotionally reactive, so people who don't get angry all the time. And the idea is that these people who don't get angry all the time and who are quite calm then get on better with the rest of the group and have more evolutionary success and more children. And on top of that, they also are more attractive to potential mates. And so the theory goes that across hundreds of thousands of years, humans have developed a more empathic way of dealing with each other, because the empathy genes in a way have spread, because people have chosen the more empathic people. It gets a little bit gruesome some of the time with theories that the really untoward, aggressive, dangerous people were got rid of by executions or by banishment. And the analogy is made with wolves and even with foxes, that if you choose ones which are more docile, then across a few generations you actually start to have evolved them to be a much more docile, domesticated species. And that's, of course, what's happened with our cats and dogs and indeed horses as well. And so the theory goes that humans, as well as domesticating those animals and having animals which are less fearful of humans, the cats will often be completely unfearful of humans.
We're more fearful of them,
foxes
aren't we?
will be as well. And dogs will be extremely faithful and calm. And the theory is that the humans have done the same to each other. We have self-domesticated ourselves. And that's now a major theory in social evolution.
And alongside that is our relationship with storytelling, dream telling, I understand, Julia.
Yes, and also I think through art practices, it's very interesting when I work with Mark because he goes through lab-based studies. And a lot of what I'm doing is the way that I've been taught through art is to observe the world in front of me, but also in an empathic way to almost occupy the thing I'm observing. So to sort of become the thing I'm observing. So if you're looking at objects on a table doing a still life, the artist becomes the still life. And you'd know that from people like Cézanne. If you look at their work, still life work, there's something of themselves in the work. And this is what's going on when I'm drawing on the pages. There's a kind of way in which I'm embedding into these narratives. And so is Freud, using the paragraph structures and the shapes. You know, there's a palimpsest of ideas, words, images, etc., coming out onto the page. And that has a deep history in artistic practice.
It's that collision, isn't it, of artistic fervour coupled with, obviously, the science that Mark is developing around dreams. I mean, your book is called The Science and Art of Dreaming, and I know that you've been on the road with it as a project. I think we've hosted something with the DRI during lockdown.
We did an online event
did.
together.
Yes, that was great. Yes.
Yeah, and you're coming back to do a
coming
live
back this
event.
summer. We're coming back this summer.
At our home in Little Venice.
Yes.
So maybe could you say a little bit about what people see at a DreamsID event if you show up? What's the experience like?
We would, it depends if it's online or in person, but the basic idea is that we would ask several people or anyone who would like to have a dream go through this process to explain the dream in a very succinct way. And then we would ask the group to vote on the one that they would like to be explored together. And after that happens, and that's probably pretty much the same online and in person. But in person, we would then have a screen behind the dreamer. The dreamer would be asked to sit at the front. The screen would be behind them. My work would be projected from a camera onto the screen behind them so that the audience would watch the drawing being produced. And Mark and the dreamer would have their back to the drawing. Mark would glance at the drawing now and again just to help me a little bit with things if I don't know certain things. Mark's quite intuitive now in saying, oh, well, what colour was the, you know. And interestingly, again, to do with empathy, prior to that, that was another thing we learned. Mark would often have his back to me and I would be, what's there then? You know, what's happening in that space? And Mark couldn't see that I'm stuck. I don't know. And people from the audience would say, well, what's on the bookshelves? Or, you know, because they can see I don't know what to draw and I'm stuck. But then Mark's kind of positioned himself more now to look and sort of see. So it's an artwork made by a group in a way. Although I'm making it, everyone is contributing something, and the discussion is then embedded through the words of Freud, which kind of float out of the page. And I don't speak at all. I go in almost into a kind of state, a sort of totally drawing state where I'm focused on the imagery. But then these words sort of pop up from the discussion, and I highlight them and create patterns and poems that are coming out of the words. And all of the book, the whole book is about dreaming. So even if you've just got one or two words about dreaming on the page, there'll always be something that's coming up from Freud. But often, the words that come up are astonishingly well related to the discussion that's happening in the room. And that's quite strange. That can be quite a strange experience.
I've witnessed it a couple of times, and it is remarkable how it relates to the meaning that the dreamer finds in the process. Without knowing that meaning beforehand.
And I've chosen the page at random. I've chosen the page within the first 5 minutes. When they've repeated the dream 3 times, I've usually seen a structure, seen a pattern within the dream, found the pattern on the page and pulled it out, and I've torn it out. And at that point, I start drawing. So I've not read the page. I don't know what's on the page. Mm-hmm. It's quite a precise process, and you just have to trust the process.
And for the people coming along, it means it's a multi-sensory experience, because at the same time as hearing the dream and hearing the discussion, they'll be seeing the dream sharer and possibly seeing each other as well in the group, but at the same time they'll be seeing Julia and seeing in front of them this large painting being developed, on the screen. So it's a multi-sensory experience that everybody will be having. So that's one of the main things that's occurring. That also occurs if it's done online as well, because if it's online, then you can see the other people attending. You can see me speaking and the dream sharer speaking and others speaking. And you can also see on one of the windows the painting developing as well. And so people in a way can alternate between what they're going to concentrate on, and they get all of these features all occurring. And one of the most important things is that it's all an event. It's what in the 1960s would have been called a happening, yes. Or in the 1910s or 20s, a Dadaist performance, and you had to be there. That is what the work of art that Julia does refers to. That's where the particular discussion occurred. And it's very much a here and now. You are in this event that won't be recurring. And for that reason, it's really quite a magical and powerful event to know that, this dream happened to that person.
And you're all sharing in it.
And they're telling you they're sharing it, and we're sharing in it, and it's all a happening for us all.
How many copies of the interpretation of dreams have you got through? Do you start with a new one on each event?
Interestingly, we are still on the same book.
Really?
Yeah, that we started with. So eventually we could put the book back together and have a book that's fully drawn on. That actually, the idea of drawing into a book came from an artist who I had grown up with called Tom Phillips. And he wrote a book called The Humument. And that book was a book he'd found in a bookshop, and then he'd worked into it and created a character called Toj. And that character, there's poetry and all sorts that happened, but he drew the character and he found the character in the books. And that book is a Gesamtkunstwerk, although I don't speak German, but I believe that's the pronunciation. And a Gesamtkunstwerk is something that you do over a long period, like a life's work. So it refers to Wagner's work. But with Tom Phillips, he found or bought this book, I think for a couple of pounds, and then for 25 years he worked on the book. So I grew up with that book, and I loved that book. So the idea of drawing into a book and finding words and finding poetry kind of came from his starting point. But with mine, they're done in 90 minutes. And that's been a process of trial and error. As I said, we started with 20 minutes, we went to 30 minutes, and really we found that I was able to do this without completely losing it, as it were. That gave me the time to concentrate, but also for it to be a happening, for it to happen and start to finish, it had to have a kind of period of about 90 minutes for me to create the work and finish it. Because I don't like to go back to it then, because it's all about the moment. It's made in the moment. But we were talking earlier about the process. So the very last part of this process then, after using the Ullman process in the middle of the session, that's what we go through. Mm-hmm. The very last bit is revealing the artwork to the dreamer. And then the dreamer's already had a lot of insights, because the Ullman technique is amazing for discovering insights about the dream. But then they get this visual, and it's a completely different, I like to say, interpretation, and an artistic interpretation of the dream. Again, I'm engaging with the paragraphs, and I'm engaging with Freud, so they've got all of this to look at the end. And there's another set of insights that come from the reading that they get from my final piece. Then we produce one of these, and we usually give it to the dreamer, and it's either a double-sized print with the dream narrative written beneath, or what we've been doing recently is Wear Your Dream, which is, at the moment, we've been producing it onto just a black T-shirt, so they would have
beautiful.
They'd have the print on the front, and on the back they have the dream narrative written.
We
can give you some pictures of that. And then they walk around wearing it, and they get more questions and interpretations from wearing the dream.
That's
so
brilliant.
this is very much, these are artistic techniques that are quite, well used, quite traditional in some ways, married with very precise scientific techniques. And this is why we think that the book is quite special, because there's something about these two worlds coming together, synthesizing in the book that is opening up more and more ways forward. I mean, we've already got ideas for the next book at the moment as well, looking at various other aspects that we haven't considered here.
It's the ultimate in dream sharing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The other question that intrigues me was, when you did this at the Freud Museum, how did they feel about you ripping pages out of the interpretation of dreams?
No, they have really, I mean, they all came in.
Did they?
In our first session that we did, because it was British Science Week. We were asked to go, and we immediately thought, what about the Freud Museum, and asked them, and yes, fair enough, you can come. And they all kind of came in, and they just loved it. It took them a little while, because it is quite a, I am tearing pages out. I am drawing on top of Freud's words, but there is also a celebratory and we're celebrating his role in dream research and dream sharing, but also for artists and designers, he's incredibly important.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the copies of the final, the book that you put together, Freud Museum would love the original, but I'm sure that you'd be able to sort of sell copies of what you've actually done on top of that. It's just such an amazing piece of collaboration.
And of course, on that, the publisher of the interpretation of dreams, the version that we use, which is the first English translation from the 1920s, that the publisher has given us permission to use the book in the production of artwork. The publisher then gave further permission for the paintings to be again reproduced in the book. And so we're very grateful for that. And Julia did choose Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, partly as a homage to Freud. Freud did develop the free association technique, which Montague Ullman and experimental psychologists use, of tracing back the dream to waking life through free associations. So we hope that he would be very pleased with this use of his book in the production of artworks that refer to dreams.
So for people who are interested in seeing the images and reading about the research, they can see that in the book, which is The Science and Art of Dreaming, available from Routledge, as I said before. And in that you can see these paintings and you can see the words that emerge from underneath the images. You can read the original dream and read some of the context of the dream that the dreamer brought to it. And then the book takes you through all the related research around that has led to the creation of DreamsID. And as well, if you want to see the process live and in action, it's going to be coming to CCPE in W2 in London on the 15th of July. Mark and Julia are going to be there, and they're going to do a live demonstration of the process at that time. We look forward to welcoming you then.
Looking forward to it. Mm-hmm.
So just a quick reminder that you can currently join the DRI as a member for just £10 a year and be part of the bigger discussion on all things dreaming, as well as support the podcast and our research. Links about membership benefits are below in the show notes. But now it's time for our Dream of the Week. And Mark is going to take us through one of the dreams from the book, The Science and Art of Dreaming, and through a brief version of the Ullman process. Mark, over to you.
Great. This is the dream. I push a shopping trolley and release it down a steep hill, and it almost causes an accident. 3 angry men beat up a man who they think pushed the trolley. I hide in a house and can see the attack through a window. The attackers leave and I go outside and see the man lying on the ground. He's almost dead. He's in a dip in the road. I do not want to admit my involvement, as they would then attack me. They have covered him in black oil and his face is half submerged in the oil. I wonder how to help him without letting my involvement in the near accident be known. In the Ullman method, the dream would be repeated, and certainly in our DreamsID process, it would be repeated a few times so that Julia can make the painting, and the painting is there in the book. Once the dream is spoken, others would talk about what it would be like if the dream had happened to them. So, for example, the fear in the dream might be something that they would highlight in discussing it in their own terms.
Okay, so I'm going to look. I'm looking at Dave now. So, Dave, if that was your dream, how would you feel?
Well, yeah, if that was my dream, I certainly, in fact, I can feel it now in listening to the dream and talking about it, that the fear of that violence and the kind of sense of panic that generates in me. And I can imagine waking up with that feeling if it had been my dream.
Yeah, for me, the pushing of the shopping trolley and letting it go reminds me of an experience in childhood where we used to play around with a shopping trolley and sit in it and go career down a bank into a stream. And there was something incredibly reckless and naughty about it. So it recalls that for me. But this sense of hiding so that you don't get the blame for it, I actually find quite scary. And it sits really uncomfortably with me, I find. I was going to ask Julia, what's it bringing up for you?
Yes, I think if it was my dream, I too would wake up with a feeling of fear from the being chased and being. Yeah, I think it would be fear. Yeah.
So what happens next then, Mark, when everybody's then
once everyone's done
in?
Yes, once everyone has chipped in like that and in a way shown that they can think about the dream and the dream is worth thinking about, it's handed back to the dreamer, and the dreamer can then say what the dreamer thinks of the comments that have been made. And then that moves then into the dreamer talking about their recent waking life. So some of the comments might be that some of these things that are said are helpful, or in some instances they're irrelevant. And that's equally helpful, to be able to say, no, that's not what it felt like or means to me. I know that. So that's all important as part of the process. But the important next stage of the process is to ask the person what was going on in your waking life before the dream occurred, on the day or days before it. And in this instance, what had happened was the dreamer had a young relative who had been unfairly blamed by somebody else, another young boy, for a very dangerous, in fact, criminal action that had occurred. And this was very, very distressing to the young relative, being blamed like that. And the dreamer also said that although the dreamer very much felt for the young relative about what had happened, the dreamer also felt for the young boy who had felt obliged in a way or had blamed the young relative in order to get out of the blame himself. And so the really interesting thing about the dream, when you know that background, is that the dream is in fact, again, unfair blame. But it's the fact that in this instance, the person in waking life who had felt empathy towards the person who was causing someone else to be blamed, the dreamer was himself in that situation. I can't admit that I've done something wrong. So for us, we put it at the start of a chapter to do with empathy, because it really is an incredible dream in that regard, that the person had felt empathy in waking life towards somebody who really was doing something wrong, blaming somebody else. And in the dream, the dreamer is in the same situation. So it's an incredibly poignant depiction of, this is me now letting somebody else take the blame.
I guess this is a definition of empathy, is being able to see something from somebody else's perspective. And in the dream, it's directly experiencing what they've experienced, which is quite remarkable.
Yes, it's thinking, yes, I can see what it's like to be in a situation where you think your only choice of action is to blame somebody else and to hide, because you know that if you make yourself known, you will then be the person hunted or punished or killed, in this case, in the dream. So it was a very poignant dream.
Yeah.
From a psychological point of view, from a neuroscience and psychology point of view, it's also extremely complex to think. This depiction of empathy is really quite complicated, because the person who you are empathizing with in waking life, you become them in the dream. It's not just a dream of empathy towards somebody else, crying, whatever, some simple depiction like that, looking at someone else. You are the person who has done the wrong thing. And through that, you are feeling empathy towards this person in waking life as a result of the dream.
It's not an effortful process. This is happening spontaneously while asleep.
Yes, and really quite astounding that a dreaming mind can think up such a complex depiction of that type of empathy. Yes, which is why we put it at the start of the chapter on dream sharing and self-domestication.
Well, it's a really lovely dream, and it's a lovely picture that comes out of it. It expresses some of those feelings. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today, and for telling us about the process, and for spending this time with us today. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. It's
been a really interesting discussion.
Yes.
Thank you. So, and Dave, thank you as well. Time to wrap up. So, sweet dreams to everybody.
Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show note for links, or find us on Instagram as the Dreamboat Podcast, on our Facebook page as Dreamboat Podcast, on Twitter as @DreamboatPod, or come and find us at driccpe.org.uk. That's driccpe.org.uk. And you can email us on driinfo@ccpe.org.uk. Once again, that's driinfo@ccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £10 a year. Yes, £10 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with the latest dream research news, and we will also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. This low offer of £10 membership will last through to the end of June 2023. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.